Riba will talk to us about South-South cooperation and access to energy. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Okay, getting on with it straight away. Thank you very much to Africa 21 for inviting UNCTAD in general, but also our division, particularly because it gives us an opportunity to present some analysis which we have just undertaken, which is in our Least Developed Countries Report 2017. The report identifies South-South cooperation as particularly useful, or potentially particularly useful for universal energy access as we define it in the report. And I'm going to explain to you how we define it and how it is different to the way it is currently being interpreted by many in terms of SDG 7. I'm going to make firstly a few opening remarks, and I'll follow up quickly with a brief overview of the main messages of the Least Developed Countries Report 2017. And I'll end with some reflections on how South-South cooperation can be a vehicle for delivering what the LDCR 2017 has defined as transformational energy access. I think everybody is fully aware of the fact and agrees that energy has a central role to play in development, and that SDG 7 is already recognized as having a central role in the achievement of all other SDGs. And so UNCTAD commonly says, for instance, that the battleground where the SDGs, the battle of the SDGs is going to be won is the LDCs. And we definitely subscribe to this view because of the findings of our report. We are alarmed by what we have discovered is potentially catastrophic implications from the current focus on social and environmental dimensions of energy access, which is encouraging a minimalist view. Can you please take away? I do not want it to move without my hand said so.
Yeah, indeed, she should not.
Okay, we see that it encourages a minimalist view of SDG 7, which potentially skews development processes. While the issues, the environmental and social issues, are undoubtedly important, UNCTAD analysis suggests that there are risks that the current focus skews the debate and encourages this minimalist view of SDG 7, which focuses on physical connection of households to sources of electricity and has the risk of overshadowing issues of quality of supply. And is also, we are seeing, leading to a dramatic underestimation of the investment needs that are required to meet SDG 7, which even from a minimalist view is a tremendously ambitious goal for LDCs considering where they are today. And potentially more catastrophic from the perspective of development is the risk of potentially suboptimal benefits from existing South-South cooperation initiatives on infrastructure, but also in terms of potentially skewing development processes towards a proliferation of low productivity household enterprises, micro enterprises, rather than a more transformative development process. Many of you are probably familiar with the concept or the notion of path dependence in development. And so if the right type of energy is not actually being supplied and there isn't a proper focus on structural transformation, there is a concern that arises that what you are going to get in LDCs is a enterprise base which is not conducive to actually taking them through the process of structural transformation that delivers meaningful development. To illustrate these points, I will first present to you the findings of the Least Developed Countries Report on transformational energy access. And I should add that the messages are particularly compelling for Africa because over 60%, probably around 70% of LDCs are actually African countries. And these LDCs represent 46% of all African countries. So we are looking at a pretty compelling case for Africa as a continent to take the issue of transformational energy access very, very seriously. So, if you're not going to take any other message away from what I'm going to say to you today, I would still like you to focus on these two main messages, which explain what the report, which encapsulates what the report really, the message it's trying to put across. And that is the three main pillars of sustainable development are indivisible. That is the economic, environmental, and social. A viewpoint or an interpretation of SDG 7, which focuses only on social and environmental concerns, is problematic. To really deliver sustainable development, you need to take all and address all the three pillars simultaneously. The other main message is that there are punitive consequences of not integrating the economic pillar in energy programs, policies, and projects. Going quickly on to the main messages, the quality of access should not be equated to the number of connections. Structural transformation will be out of reach for the majority of LDCs without transformational energy access. And in the next slide, I'll explain to you what a transformational energy access is. Transformational energy access focuses or gives equal priority, if not the most important priority, to the productive use of energy, because that is what turns universal access into economic development. The mere action of providing a solar lamp does not equate to development. Yes, you may facilitate the education of many children in rural areas, or many children even in urban areas that do not have access to energy. But the real question is, once that child graduates from university or from school, they probably expect to have a job waiting for them. And even if they decide to become an entrepreneur, their choice of entrepreneurial activity to go into is going to be pretty much defined by what kind of access they have to energy. If it is only basic energy which does not allow them to choose a variety of entrepreneurial activities that will contribute to structural transformation and diversification in an economy, then you are going to have a problem. This means that universal access to energy must go beyond meeting basic domestic needs and target productive uses. it must favor broad-based economic development and the reorientation of LDC economies towards more modern activities. The unprecedented development opportunities which are offered by increased access and technological advances which we are seeing now, particularly in the area of renewables, could very much largely be missed if we do not provide what we are calling transformational energy access. This is particularly critical in Africa given the youth bulge. Now I will define for you transformational energy access. Right, it embodies, basically, it's best understood by understanding the qualities it embodies. It embodies accessibility to all, and which allows for increased productivity, new technologies and production methods, and new products. And given the fact that LDCs and African countries right now are developing in a global economic environment where competition has intensified because it is technology and knowledge intensive, if you do not have the kind of access to energy that provides you the possibility to actually go into new forms and discover new forms of comparative advantage, I think the implications are obvious. Scale. Scale here, when we speak of scale in terms of transformational energy access, we're talking about the quantity and the quality of the energy supply. It has to be at a scale where you can run a machine, which is a huge industrial machine, but at the same time, you can light a house up and watch TV. It has to provide different, a diversified spectrum in terms of scale. It has to be reliable. That means you have well-maintained infrastructure which delivers continuous and stable supply. This has implications also for the renewables energy, which, as you probably know, is intermittent by its nature, because the sun comes out during the day and it sets, and therefore it's not there at night. And so there are implications in terms of the kinds of investments you need to make and the kinds of technologies that have to be simultaneously put in place to be able to really get the full advantage of some of the renewables sources of energy, like solar. The same goes for wind. It's windy one day, it's not windy the next day. So there are all the technologies which are there, but obviously in planning for transformational energy access, you have to understand the actual magnitude of the investment you're going to make. Economic viability. This is an intractable problem for many African countries where their national utilities struggle to attain economic viability. Now, I'm not going to go very much into this topic, but I encourage you to read Chapter 5 and Chapter 4 of the Least Developed Countries Report 2017, which goes into depth. And there we have also a series of policy briefs which we have brought out, and one of them deals specifically with this issue of economic viability. So, given the low ability, in a nutshell, developing countries, LDCs in particular, African countries amongst them, their populations have low ability to pay. This is a problem. But electricity is a commodity, it has to be paid for, the infrastructure is highly expensive, there's a lot of skill and technology that goes into putting in place a reliable system. It also has to be well maintained. Therefore, rates of return and all that are very important. Affordability, however, because of the low ability to pay, is also a key issue that cannot be relegated to a second order priority. And this has been a challenge where African countries have tried to leverage private investment into the electricity sector. Another key message of the report is that transformational energy access requires fostering what we are calling a two-way nexus between economic transformation and energy demand. The energy transformation nexus is central to system viability and sustainability. The viability of investments in electricity infrastructure depend critically on a critical mass of demand that is growing, because it is that demand that generates the source of capital to fund investment and to keep the system maintained. Economic transformation generates demand directly in production processes, in bringing up industry. And it also strengthens domestic demand by raising household incomes, because from the growth of industry and productive activities, you have a growth in jobs. And if it's meaningful structural transformation, you get meaningful, well-paid jobs, or at least you attain meaningful standards of living. And that creates, on the other hand, demand on the household level. Another main message of the report is that transformational energy access is as much important for rural development as it is for industrial development and urban centers. Rural development is critical to addressing poverty in LDCs. It is also critical to addressing system viability, because with populations, the majority of populations living in rural areas, that is where the biggest increases in demand are going to be found. And that demand is necessary to put in place a system which is reliable and strong enough, and also to drive structural transformation. Sacrificing financial viability is not the answer, but affordability, as I said, cannot be relegated to a secondary goal. So solutions have to be found for the fact that rural populations are likely to be very disadvantaged in terms of their ability to pay. They are highly dispersed in many countries. The terrain could be inhospitable. It could be hostile, and therefore putting up electricity infrastructure may be problematic, even for decentralized, standalone renewable solutions. There's a high cost attached to renewables in LDCs, not only because of the risks in terms of the investment grade of the country, and for private sector getting capital from the commercial market, but also because the new technologies, their performance is highly impacted by local conditions. Therefore, they may appear to be low cost, but once they are put in a specific location, the conditions in that location could drive up the cost and make them a unattainable solution for LDCs. And in fact, this is exactly what is happening in LDCs. The renewables are not actually addressing the affordability issue. And with the private sector coming in, what we're seeing is, because profit is first order priority for the private sector, they are then focusing on outputs. So, and providing very basic services. So they will focus perhaps on a solar lamp. They will focus on a solar panel. But with the affordability issues, the solar panel that a rural person is going to afford is the one that only gives them lighting for 3 hours in the evening. Even the community projects which we have analyzed, we see that what they're delivering is cell phone charging, it is lighting for schools and things like that. But as soon as somebody plugs an electric iron to the system, it collapses, it trips. It cannot sustain a full house, for lack of a better word, of appliances in a modern home. It cannot sustain a washing machine. It can't sustain a stove. If it does sustain a stove, it has to be a special stove which is modified to be able to run on the type of scale of supply that a solar panel or whatever these basic needs solutions are available. So coming quickly to how South-South cooperation could potentially help in promoting a focus on transformational energy access rather than basic needs which are driven by the desire to leave no one behind. We're saying that you're effectively leaving quite a lot of people behind by your intermediate action. And if developing countries take the view that, okay, the household in the rural areas is connected, and they don't think about how they are connected or what they're connected to, they will tick the box and say, we've met SDG 7. No, you haven't, because SDG 7 is part of the entire sustainable development, which says you must have meaningful development which is sustainable at the end of the day. And you will not be meeting it if you tick your box for SDG 7 on the basis of a few solar lamps and solar panels. I'm obviously exaggerating here, but I'm sure you get my point. The benefits of regional cooperation are well known, very well known. Africa is already, has some fairly successful initiatives already in the area of cooperation on power. It is cost effective, there are shared costs and potentially lower prices. And I say here potentially because it is not a given. It depends. The cooperation on power relieves shortages. It diversifies the energy mix because countries have different resource endowments. Now, the case for cooperation in electrification in Africa is reinforced when we look at the current situation LDCs are in and the climate change risks. Low demand is a problem right across the board, and cost of renewable solutions are very high. Just to give you an idea, for an energy project in an LDC, the same project in a developed country could attract financing at a cost of up to 40% less on the commercial market. That is a huge difference. So cooperation, you can see already where cooperation, intra-regional cooperation can be of advantage. It is also an advantage because the integration of renewables in energy systems requires pretty sophisticated infrastructure. It also, with the way that the smart grids are going, for instance, you need parallel investments in IT. and infrastructure. So the costs are really huge, and a cooperation is one way in which LDCs and African countries could try and reduce costs, as well as pooling risk so that they can get commercial credit much cheaper, because it is unlikely that public funding can stretch to the kinds of investment needs we are anticipating. Potential benefits also are from the institutional and implementation capacity viewpoint, because once you start cooperating, you need institutions which will govern that cooperation. And that trickles down to the kinds of institutions and the capacities you have at the national level. And so this is one advantage. It will also help with a smooth and coordinated transition to clean energy. This is particularly important for renewables energy because it avoids a false dichotomy between off-grid and on-grid solutions, because the truth is the two are complementary. Because the intermittency of renewables actually destabilizes the system and also does not provide energy at certain times of the day. And the industrial base can help with the demand issue on the household side, because, and the renewables make them more profitable, because the industry uses the energy during the day, whereas the households use it during the evening. And we know that for the renewables, especially solar, it peaks during the day, and you want to channel it towards productive activities because mostly it's not being used by the households. So there's this symbiosis that needs to take place. And benefits of South-South cooperation is that it could bring about flexible and tailored renewable solutions. So for instance, I mentioned the fact that renewables technologies perform differently depending on the local context. If your neighboring country has more conducive local conditions to put up a sensitive renewables technology, then it might make sense to put up your because it's going to lower the cost, the facility in your neighbor's land and just have the interconnecting grid to share. So there are all possibilities through South-South cooperation to have some flexibility in renewable solutions. And of course, it could bring about an enhanced focus on transformational energy access. I've pretty much covered this one on rural electrification. This pretty much is the question of your rural area may neighbor an urban center across the border. And therefore, rather than sinking money into your rural area, which has dispersed population, low demand, and does not have anchor premium customers who can actually provide the critical mass of demand for a system and fund investments in a system which delivers the right scale and is reliable and stable, then you might want to cooperate with your neighbor, because then they can electrify easily. You can gain from their urban centers electrified state to supply energy to your rural area and begin the process of fostering high productivity enterprises which will drive structural transformation.
1 minute.
All right. I probably won't finish in 1 minute, but I'm going to try. South-South cooperation could help with strengthening national institutions and capabilities. And it can do this if it actually encourages countries, cooperating countries, to pay more attention to long-term system planning. cooperation in infrastructure projects usually facilitates this because you just have to, if you're putting up infrastructure with long lifespans and project profiles. There's likely to be skill sharing and diversity and skill investments. In Africa, there are some countries which are pretty well advanced in experimenting with renewables. Some are not. This is highly specialized knowledge, which, because of the differences in local conditions, is not transferable from one project to another. So it is through implementation that you go through a process of discovery, and then you understand how the technology performs in different conditions. So it would be very important through South-South cooperation that this knowledge is shared, and countries avoid wasteful investments or finding out that the project they've put down actually doesn't work or turns out to be more expensive than they anticipated, because they did not have this prior knowledge about how it would perform in local conditions. South-South cooperation can be beneficial if it builds capacities for incorporating gendered approaches into energy programs. The analysis of the Least Developed Countries report finds that the focus on social and environmental concerns has led to a perverse situation where programs which are intended to address gender are focusing very much on, they're staying pretty much gendered themselves because it's cooking. When they think gender, they think cooking, but you're still staying within the confines of the gender roles. It's cooking, and therefore it focuses on the output of how do we address the environment with cooking. Okay, it's a cooking stove, it's an environmentally friendly cooking stove. But it leaves the women still very much engaged in the cooking for very long times. And it doesn't open up opportunities for them to go into other things. And even where they already have branched out to other things, we know that in Africa, for instance, agricultural, agro beneficiation is done mainly by women. But this focus on environmental and social is missing that critical role that women play especially in West Africa when it comes to agro-business and what's the word I'm looking for? Transforming raw agricultural produce into transforming, right, raw agricultural product. They play a critical role, especially in West Africa. But we haven't seen through the renewables focus and the SDG 7 implementation enough programs that go all the way looking at various activities. Again, it's a question of what is profitable for the private sector. And for them, because of the uncertainties which prevail, especially in rural areas, and around the position of women in the society, this is perhaps a more risky area, and so they've stayed out. But perhaps through regional cooperation, and we could come up with better strategies to address these issues. Now, regional cooperation will contribute to transformational energy access if it leads to a diversified mix. This is one of the key goals, anyway, of current regional cooperation in Africa on power. But an important thing with the new renewables is that technology selection should be in line with local conditions and future needs. And so, probably, in view of the analysis we have come up with, some of this cooperation and plans which are down, regional plans which already exist, should be assessed against the standard of transformational energy access to see whether it is actually meeting all these standards which I've met. Last slide. And this one I want to discuss now is more in line with the issue of the negotiations, where does South-South cooperation fit, and really what needs to be done to make it more productive. Energy is at the regional level, even at the bilateral level, at the cooperation level, is subject to interlocking policy influences as it is at the national level. You have pressures of technology which are pushing reform. You have pressures on the political economy side, which do not go away whether you are active on the regional level or on the national level. And you have market concerns as well. So we know that at the regional level, at the South-South cooperation level, there's the trade aspect. So there has to be a balance. If we look at the regional trade agreements, for instance, or the cooperation on infrastructure, they should aim to strike a balance between cooperation and competition in energy trade. Quick example is the alleged anti-competitive behavior of the most powerful partner in the Southern African power pool, for instance. You have issues where you have neighboring countries which have the same resource, hydro, for instance. They all want to leverage trade and for structural transformation to be in their energy sectors. And so will this chill cooperation? We don't know. But the point is, if at the regional level this is thought of from the onset, and mechanisms and systems are put in place to deal with these issues up front, to see how they can be resolved, so that it is not at the point where you are trying to implement a program that you have squabbles, or you are in the middle. Look at Ethiopia, in the middle of putting up your dam, and Egypt says, you know, we are an owner and we're not sure you're going the right way about it. Sudan also has rights to the resource. So there should be mechanisms at the regional level, and it should be thought up right up front, and there should be transparency as to how these issues will be dealt with. It is part of the issue here is that national ownership of regional plans is key. And there has to be some obvious way that constituencies can see that the regional plan actually benefits their national plan for structural transformation. Last one.
It was the last slide.
It was the last one. Okay. And that means that we have to integrate energy, trade, and development policy more closely. I'll stop since I'm under pressure.
So energy is a key. Social, environmental shadows the quality of deliveries. We need to tailor the solution due to environment, due to the context, due to capacities of every country. We need to reinforce cooperation with the South-South regional cooperation in order to complement capacities and to secure reliable energy and investment. As we are a bit late right now, I won't take any question right now, so I will invite you to come back this afternoon and so to exchange with take part of the lunch break after. You will be there for the lunch break? Neither?
Quick question.
Okay, one quick question then.
Well, thank you very much for the
5 words.
yeah, brilliant.
Because she is long.
No, I will just sound to that and say straightforward that the SDGs will not succeed if they do not succeed in Africa. And then
For sure.
the SDGs will not succeed in Africa if we do not succeed in reaching the SDG 7, which is universal access to electricity 24 hours. You know, I just want to add that 621 million people, that's 3/3 of the African population, still do not have access to electricity. And if the current trend continues, we will only be able to realize universal access to energy by 2080. This is just
We'll be there anyway.
you know, but we have evidence that that shows that.
Okay, so energy is a big issue. Energy, Africa has to face it. You cannot have energy if you don't have capacities in producing, capacities in distributing, capacities with local resource to maintain the infrastructure as well, because another object is that through energy you create dependence, north-south dependence on technology and stuff like that, so you have to regain capacities in the south to develop south-south solutions. That's what we were talking about, tailoring the solution. I will invite Mr. Poon for thanks a lot.
The gender is important.
Yeah.